Welcome, truth seekers, to another episode of Patriot Productions TV. We're here with you today and we want to talk more about Climategate. And as a matter of fact, this is going to be Climategate Part 3. And I want to share a few more quotes with you, but I want to break this down from the level of abstraction to a very specific example. And I want you to ask yourself, would I act this way if this was something that really mattered to me? Now, as you know from Climategate episode 1 and 2, we have a situation where the University of East Anglia has released, or the Freedom of Information procedure had begun and they were supposed to release and had not released data, and then they were quote-unquote hacked. Well, now we know that someone at East Anglia sent about a third of what eventually ended up being on the internet hacked. They sent it to the BBC and asked them to act on it, and the BBC sat on it for more than a month. Surprise, surprise, the BBC being a cheerleader for man-made global warming, they didn't step forward and say, oh, wait a minute, we've got disturbing data. But what's most disturbing about this, and I want to start to teach by analogy here, I'm going to lay two sets of examples side by side using a parable. What we've got here is a scientist who come out to you and said to you repeatedly, you've got to cut your energy use by X%. Now, it doesn't matter what percentage it is, because as we're going to talk about today, there is no data to support this. The dog ate global warming is basically the subtitle for this episode, because at the University of East Anglia, at the Climatic Research Unit, they dumped all the original data. So it can't be verified, it can't be replicated, it can't be looked at by other scientists to do what science is all about. Science is an adversary process where you put forth a hypothesis, you collect data, you test it, then you say to everyone else in the community, here's my hypotheses, here's the data we collected, here's the statistical procedures we used, here's the result, go ahead, do your best. Now, I will tell you, not only do I still have my data for my dissertation, every PhD holder I know who did a PhD has the original data, the rough data, whether it's tapes, whether it's cards from the old IBM punch card system, they've still got that because it's a significant part of your development. And you never, even though it's a love-hate thing, you never get rid of that. And the idea that they've admitted in these emails and now publicly that they dumped the data, they got rid of it. The original data, all gone. It was on tape, it was in paper, we got rid of all the original data. No one who's got the goods on a phenomena of interest dumps the original data. Nobody. And think about yourself. If you went out and shot a Boone and Crockett record elk or deer or antelope, you wouldn't just leave the rack out there laying on the plains because your word's good enough. The very first thing you do when you see large game is you take pictures of it. And the next thing you do if you're a hunter is you shoot it. And then you bring the rack in and you get it mounted. You don't throw away the original data. Not ever. And the fact that that's exactly what the CRU has done proves to me, as someone who's done real research, and I've got boxes and boxes, my wife will testify to this, there's boxes and boxes of old data all over my garage and stored in my office at school and at home. You never get rid of it, ever. And the reason for that is to be ethically compliant. If somebody calls you 10, 20, 30 years later, you say, here's the data. Now, of course, it would make my wife gloriously happy if I would go through and burn all of my paper data from the years. And since East Anglia has done it, I don't know, maybe I should go do it, who knows? But I want you to think about this. Imagine for a second the unimaginable. You've got cancer or your wife's got cancer. And it's a very specific type of cancer, and one medical school says this cancer can only be caused by this one human-produced incident. And we have the data to prove it. As a consumer of medical care, making the decision for you or for your wife or for your children, if that organization that says we have the data to prove that this one thing only, CO2 only causes global warming, that's Mr. Gore's statement, CO2 causes global warming, CO2's the enemy, the earth has a fever and it's CO2's fault, but you produce the CO2. Now, when you start thinking about this, you have to go, well, that's ridiculous on its face. One thing can't control the entire climate system. One tiny thing, 2% of the Earth's climate is CO2, and 2% of that 2% or 0.02 times 0.02 being 0.0004 of the atmosphere is human-caused CO2, and that's the only driver of global warming. Back to the medical example. There you are, taking care of your wife. This hospital says we've identified the only cause, and if we take this out at a huge expense, it'll bankrupt you and your children, but it'll cure the cancer. We promise. And you say, well, I'd like to see the data. Oh, we dumped the data. We got rid of the data. Just take our word for it. You know for a fact you wouldn't do that with your wife's life hanging in the balance, or your life, or your kids' lives. You wouldn't do that just like if you were a hunter and you went out and shot a great big beautiful bull elk that was the biggest in the world and was going to be a Boone and Crockett record. You wouldn't leave that rack laying there on the ground and say, well, I'll just tell everybody about it. We can dump the actual evidence. We don't need the real evidence. All we need is the evidence after we've massaged it, after we've tricked it. That's a quote from the data that's been exposed. In an email, they say we got a trick to disguise the decline in temperature over the last decade, showing that global mean temperature has gone down while CO2 has gone up, thus rejecting the hypothesis of the global warming alarmists. No, we've got a trick to take care of that. And it's trick in the good sense. It isn't evil. Take their word for it. Now, go to the Wall Street Journal. Go to the editorial section. This is where the best writing is being done on this. It's also where the best research is coming out. Here's a quote from Michael Mann, okay? You've taken the words out of my mouth. Skepticism is essential for the functioning of science. It yields an erratic path toward eventual truth. But legitimate scientific skepticism is exercised through formal scientific circles, in particular, the peer review process. Now, I want to stop that sentence right there. We're almost out of time in this episode, but I want to tell you that he and his colleagues, Mann and his colleagues, went out of their way to pervert the peer review process. By his own words, that's where skepticism has to come from. So back to you as a medical consumer. The wife has cancer. You have to make the choice. Your family will be bankrupted now and forever to pay this off, and the only data they have is their word because they dumped. They threw away the real data. Do you believe that? I don't believe it. I don't think you should believe it. And I know the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times shouldn't believe it if journalism still means anything in America. We'll see you in a little bit with part 4 of Climategate. Hang in there, folks. Go out and enjoy the weather. It's the only weather we got.